So welcome to the World Beyond Belief, Dr. Karlstrom. It's an honor to have you here from an undisclosed location.
Well, thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Paul Marco. Can you hear me?
Yes,
can you hear me?
You're cutting in and out, but let's try to do it. And if we have any trouble, we'll reconnect until we get it going.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, we have had a series of interviews on gang stalking. This is kind of the popular term. I think we can increase our understanding of this phenomena by researching, and I would like to report what I've learned from a series of books that I've been reading that are now kind of all marked up. This is a great book by Mark M. Rich called New World War, Revolutionary Methods for Political Control, in which he's got another one as well called The Hidden Agenda, or The Hidden Evil. But he exposes the enormous paper trail that underlies this phenomenon that we call gang stalking, including, the laws and executive orders that permit the military. Yes.
Eric, you need to repeat the name of the book and the author because you kind of cut out during that thing.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
The book is The New World War, Revolutionary Methods for Political Control. The author is Mark M. Rich, and it came out, I think, in 2011. And he documents the military papers that pertain to what's going on now, and the laws that have been passed and executive orders that allow the intelligence and military complex to target civilians. And of course, there's a lot of legalese terms in there, but I would like to go through some of these terms with you today.
Good.
To show you and the audience how enormous this system of political and psychological control is. It is global, it is interagency, and this is, as we've established in the past, it's the modern extension of the FBI's COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program of the 60s and 70s, where they neutralized political dissidents and groups of dissidents using a lot of these very same techniques. This is now married with the information and results that are coming out of the CIA's MK Ultra mind control programs. And then what I'd like to talk about tonight or today is another component of this is the modern extension of the Phoenix program, which was a CIA program in Vietnam in which they targeted the civilian quote-unquote support system for the Viet Cong. And what it wound up to be was a bounty hunting program where they would create lists, and then they would go in and neutralize, i.e. kill, by many, many techniques, the civilian quote-unquote infrastructure of Vietnam. This is a way to terrorize the population. And we have now another excellent book that I would like to talk about. This fellow, Douglas Valentine, has written a book about the Phoenix program, which I haven't read yet, but I'm going to get. This one can't come out this year. The CIA has organized crime, how illegal operations corrupt America and the world. And Douglas Valentine's about our age, and he's seen it all, and he's kept going as a researcher and written about how, this underbelly of corruption has affected America and the world. He has a couple great chapters on the Phoenix program and how that has morphed now into the Department of Homeland Security. And this is a conclusion also that has come, that is included in this book by Marshall Thomas, Monarch, the New Phoenix Program. Now, this is a slightly older book, 2007, but he's come to the same conclusions. And if you put these three together with, again, the secret team, the CIA and its allies in control of the United States and the world, by L. Fletcher Prouty, who was very high in Army intelligence and in fact was the liaison between the Army and the CIA for a 7 or 8 year period under under Eisenhower's administration, with Alan Dulles as CIA director. You put this stuff together, and it becomes much more clear what we're dealing with here. And of course, we have to remember that most people who are targeted individuals around the world in this program are unaware, and this is by design. It's intended that they not be aware that they're being targeted. They're being neutralized, they're being destabilized, they're being destroyed by a combination of things, including non-lethal weapons, which includes what they call PsyOps, psychological operations, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because this is a vast field in the military. And non-lethal weapons, of course, also include directed energy weapons, the so-called soft kill, silent kill, slow kill, but they actually do kill. They can be ramped up to kill. And this includes microwaves, millimeter waves, acoustic waves, and lasers, basically. And then, of course, the technology just goes on because the Pentagon has been doing this, over several decades with enormous budgets. And a lot of this is black budget. Yeah. A lot of it isn't black budget. But again, it's very high tech. We can assume the Pentagon is at least 50 to 100 years ahead yes. of the general population in terms of their technology. So even going through books like this, I don't consider myself to be an expert. I'm just I'm just approaching the true scope of these enormous programs. It would be wonderful if you could get a military person to come on your show and talk about it from a military perspective, because this is what these guys are paid to do and have been paid to do. We have lots and lots of experts. Get John B. Alexander or Michael Aquino or many of the people who have been involved with these programs. Because they really are the experts on it. And if I could start, Paul, with just giving some of the conclusions of these authors, then launch into it, and I can get into more detail. This is coming from Marshall Thomas, who wrote Monarch, the New Phoenix Program. He has a 15-minute YouTube, which you can look at, in which he summarizes the program. I think he does an excellent job, so I'll just kind of state what he states. And I want to start broad, because ultimately this is a war between the haves and the have-nots. It's a war between the super rich, the 0.01% and less, and the rest of us. That's what it is. And he makes the point, and so does Douglas Valentine, and so does Mark M. Rich. Here's what Marshall Thomas says. He says, unwitting Americans and the citizens of other nations are facing a destabilization operation, one designed to bring down the existing world governments, all 195 or whatever, existing world governments, and to institute a one world government fascist dictatorship in its place. So now we have the context. As we'll see as we get into this, what you're doing is you're pitting large segments of the population, including military, intelligence, civilian spies, against dissenters and others who have been designated as targets. And so you have to decide that society cannot last long. So even to be careful how we expose this, because the double bind here is that if we attack and destroy the system, we attack and destroy the entire nation. And that is what the powers that be want. So what we need to do is go back to the Constitution and arrest and prosecute the guilty, which, as we'll find, is an enormous number of people. Remember, we did an excellent, I thought, well, I shouldn't say excellent, but we did a very detailed program on 911 and the 46 drills that were ongoing on the day of 9/11 that were discovered by Webster Tarpley, the economic historian, PhD. And what we found out there was an enormous number of agencies involved. There's NATO, there's UN, there's the Air Force dominantly, there's the New York Police Department, on and on and on. Well, I think there's a principle there. The principle is if you spread out the guilt so that the guilty outnumber everybody else, how are you going to prosecute them? And that, I think, is where we're at. Now, that said, not all people in those agencies would be in the know as to what the real implications of what they're doing are. For instance, in these drills that, remove the warfighter planes, the fighter jets out of the DC area, et cetera. They're following orders. So we have to, derail that system. But anyway, let me continue with Thomas's comment here. The U.S. intelligence agencies, in conjunction with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, Stanford Research Institute, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and companies like Raytheon and Lockheed have set up a counterinsurgency war. That's what they've always done. What the CIA does every time. What they do is they go attack individuals in another country or a country. And then when people try to defend themselves, the CIA and the military label them as insurgents. Okay, now the CIA and the military are the counterinsurgency, so they're going to go after those insurgents. Well, they created the whole conflict in the first place, right. And the insurgents are just the ones who are trying to stay alive. So they've set up a counterinsurgency. There's nothing that has changed. Now it is being applied worldwide. Have set up a counterinsurgency war that is taking place on a worldwide basis, aimed at potential enemies such as political activists and whistleblowers. These targets are generally people with a very high IQ who are also capable of influencing the people around them, as well as having a history of political activism. Then he says, this counterinsurgency war that is being waged against these individuals is portrayed as a type of game, a stalking game, the most dangerous game. What's the reality TV show, The Hunger Games, perhaps called Watch Him Run, some such game that is taking place on the internet so people can observe the targets using DARPA tracking technology, GPS technology, and RFID technology that follows the target everywhere they go, in their home, their car, their place of work, or even in cross-continental travel, anywhere on the surface of the earth. So I'm in Baja, California, and I'm sure I haven't gotten away from, being monitored and surveilled. There is no way that the targets can escape this game, the stalking game. And then he goes on and he talks about how this is really a combination of psychological operations, which we call gang stalking, and directed energy weapons, which we call psychotronic or electronic warfare weapons. Combine them, it's all non-lethal weapons, NLW. And we have documents, from the CFR in 1995 saying we're going to have to use these on enemies of the state, basically, internal enemies who, aren't getting with the program. And we're going to do it secretly, and we're going to do it in combination. And so that's in there's so many documents. We're going to use these weapons in combination. We're going to use them secretly. And this is in, scads of military documents, scads of military, and I'll give you some examples. But before I do that, let me just give you the conclusions of Marshall Thomas. And I think what we'll see is that in our previous discussions, we've gotten part, but all of the program. He's saying that the modern gang stalking program is coming out of, again, COINTELPRO, it's coming, FBI's COINTELPRO, CIA's MKUltra. Also the fact that the US government has experimented non-consensually on over 500,000 people during the last 40, 50 years, in all kinds of experiments, radiation, et cetera, chemical, biological weapons. And also the Phoenix program. And the Phoenix program is very important to understand the Phoenix program. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then he says all three illegal programs have been enfolded into a single program using the military strategy known as force multiplication to accomplish three aims in one single terrible program of, one, torture to modify behavior. So this is torture. They know it's torture. They want it to be torture. They know how to torture. This is what they learned with the MKUltra. Two, experimentation to perfect the new weapons. Okay, we got that part in previous interviews. This is a weapon system system that they're refining because they want to apply it more widely. And then 3, neutralization of people on a hit list. Okay, so that's Thomas's synopsis. And he said this is back in 2007 when he wrote this, and we know more now. But he said the case that this is occurring is based on 4 facts. And these are the bare bones case to avoid confusion, disinformation, and circular arguments that lead nowhere. And he says, number 1, MK-Ultra, the CIA's mind control experiments, took place at over 80 institutions, including 44 universities, 15 private companies, 12 hospitals, and 3 prisons. The current illegal program that he's calling Monarch, which we're calling gang stalking, which the real name is unknown, but we'll get to it in a minute. Yeah. It's equally complex. The 4 facts are all that is necessary to convince a reasonable person that this atrocity is really taking place and demands immediate action. Next one, he's saying the microwave weapons, directed energy weapons, like the active denial system, ADS, and millimeter radars are public electromagnetic weapons. You can buy one. You get yourself the right magazine. You can buy one, and then maybe we just have a war between our neighbors. It's like I'll get my little computer device that zaps you, and you get your little computer device that zaps me. Okay, the Russians used microwave weapons to attack the American embassy in Moscow in the 1950s. In response, the U.S. began a secret crash program to develop microwave weapons. The next one, number 3, there's a criminal history dating back to 1943, a prior pattern of criminal behavior all through the Cold War. Again, 500,000 U.S. citizens were used as human guinea pigs in nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons development programs. And again, the FBI COINTEL program government had hit lists of political activists, and they executed them. If you were to tally up the battle between the FBI and the Black Panthers, the FBI killed 28 Black Panthers. The Black Panthers didn't kill anybody in the FBI. So it's 28-0 in favor of the FBI. Right. And of course, the FBI and the CIA were setting up these other cults like the Sudanese Liberation Army with Patty Hearst, and also the Manson cults. I mean, these are ways to get into the society and play around with these techniques and technologies, and to use these cults for mind control experiments, which they did, of course, especially after they were forced underground by the Church Committee hearings in 1975, which exposed over 10,000 illegal CIA operations between 1947 and 1975. Well, of course, now you've got that amount of time, or a little bit, probably more since then. How many illegal CIA operations have there been since 1975? I would guess at least that many. And then the last one, credible witnesses, people who have testified that they are targets of classified non-lethal microwave weapons assaults and organized gang stalking. Tom has interviewed more than 200 targets in person and documented their story. He found, unlike others, by the way, that most TIs are political activists or whistleblowers that are around 40 years old, have an above average IQ, and share other commonalities. About 70% are women, apparently. The majority of targets fit a common profile similar to the victims of previous programs. And then he says, persons of interest, military intelligence officers, INSCOM, have worked since 1980 to develop non-lethal weapons for the Army. They publicly advocated using them on civilians to neuter people or neutralize people, the MK-Ultra crimes of the CIA, and gave classified weapons to local law enforcement and others. So now these weapons are in the hands of law enforcement and even civilian agencies. And the DHS, of course, is operating, Department of Homeland Security is operating these fusion centers, 78 of them in all states and major cities. And borderline and superstitions as part of a smokescreen cover-up. In other words, the CIA instigates and infiltrates cults. Military intelligence officers in charge of non-lethal weapons development and government physicists who invent non-lethal technologies for the Army are both loudly advocating borderline beliefs and superstitions like doomsday cults and remote viewing. So we've really really gone over to the dark side. Our intelligence and military definitely has gone over to the dark side. So this needs to be pointed out, corrected. Thomas talks about the 5 reforms that he sees as a way to end this secret, dirty war. 1, open all records and secret archives. 2, disarm all electromagnetic weapons. 3, have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, TRC. 4, convene an international conference to ban all electromagnetic weapons. By the way, Dennis Kucinich tried to pass a bill in Congress in 2003 that would have done this, but it was voted down. Finally, an international Bill of Rights that is enforceable such that the state cannot crush its internal enemies. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the states crushing internal dissent and internal enemies and terrorize the domestic population so that the state is unopposed in all things. If a president imprisons, tortures, or murders their political enemies, then they must be sure that they will end their days in a prison cell. And I added little parentheses, or by firing squad. I don't think there's enough punishment to mete out to these individuals. Myself, I think they're beyond the pale, onto the dark side. Now, let me just let me stop there, Paul, and hear from you. What I'm saying here is that there's an enormous paper trail. The military, Congress, certainly the intelligence agencies have developed this program, taking technology, very secret technology, very high technology, and they have decided to make it global. And so what we're looking at, it's a global police state, much like we had under the Soviet Union, under the Cheka, which was terrorizing the people and did the Red Terror, much like the East German Stasi, in which 1 out of 6 citizens were enlisted to become citizen spies and harass and intimidate and surveil their fellow citizens. And this then became the state police, or the Stasi. And it was also versions of that in Hungary and Poland and Czechoslovakia and Portugal. So anytime you get a really draconian police state, they want to, put this blanket of terror and deception on the people so that the people are afraid to express themselves. Essentially, of course, this is entirely anti the Constitution. It's antithetical to the U.S. Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence, that say that governments are instituted amongst humans so that our God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are protected. And when governments fail in this basic responsibility, it is our duty and responsibility to alter or abolish those governments. Well, we've gone beyond that point. So now we have a real challenge. I mean, this government has gone off the deep end. And I would just to kind of bring it back to the bigger picture, I would say that, it's an overthrow. We've had an overthrow of our government. We've had several. I think one was in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was established by European bankers, the Rothschilds and their agents, the Warburgs and the Schiffs, et cetera. Yes. And then when Kennedy was killed, I think this was another overthrow. Our country was taken over by Wall Street and its power and minions. And I think 9/11 has to be seen also as a coup, not so much against the government, which they already controlled, but against the American people, right, which still had a voice. So since 9/11, what we've seen is an attempt to completely submerge and neutralize the American population as a force. Now, what's so fascinating to me is that Donald Trump got in, and he's being inaugurated on this very day, the 20th of January, on a Friday, 2017. He's won on an anti-globalization platform. And yet all of this, this draconian state is to bring in one world government and globalization. So now we have a very schizophrenic situation where Trump is advocating for nationalism. Well, if he really is going to advocate for nationalism, I think he's going to have to stand up for the rights of the American people and the Constitution. So we will see if Trump weighs in on this issue and does something constructive, because theoretically he has the power to call off the dogs of war off of the American people and the people of the world. So America has become the dark empire. We are the beast, if you want to go to the Bible. We are the second beast. The first beast probably Israel. Let me give you a couple definitions here.
Okay.
This is right out of the book New World War, Revolutionary Methods for Political Control. And this coming out of many military documents. It's called 4GW, Fourth Generation Warfare. Okay, this is what they're doing. This is what the gang stalking is. It's a form of political information warfare waged against civilians by a state or other entity. It utilizes civilians and the military, indeed all of society, to target civilian adversaries, also known as domestic state enemies, insurgents, extremists, non-state actors, cells of fanatics, and sometimes even citizen terrorists who value national sovereignty, for instance, or pose some other perceived threat to the state's interests.
Right.
Okay, so here we have this whole system turned upside down, where the power structure is got the guns pointing inward at the individuals who actually believe in the Constitution.
Yes.
And who believe in national sovereignty, because they want to merge with the world government. And then to go on with that, anyone disseminating information contrary to the state's national security interests may become an enemy. Okay, so here's why I'm an enemy, for instance. I have a website, 911nwo.com. I have one called naturalclimatechange.org. In these sites, I wrote an article in 2002 as a professor of geography at California State University, Stanislaus. I wrote a rather lengthy academic style article called Reflections on the Origins of 911, 3 scenarios. And in 2002, when there was a lot of fear in the land and people were not sure they wanted to put their name on anything, I put my name on that thing. Well, obviously that seems to have gotten me on a list.
Yeah.
The fact that I challenged the war on terror narrative, that I challenged the 911 narrative, this makes, and of course the global warming nonsense narrative, this makes me a threat to the national security of the state. Okay, so this is why I've been targeted now with directed energy weapons 2 or 3 times at least, and I can talk about that later. Now that I've read more about it, I understand that I was targeted as early as 2006 with directed energy weapons. And let me just continue here. The goal of the new war is the psychological collapse of the new enemies using a combination of tactics. Defeating the new enemies involves the synchronized use of non-lethal directed energy weapons, isolation, deprivation. They're really big on sleep deprivation and social deprivation. They want to isolate you from your support structure. And PsyOps against individuals and groups. And this is also called the capital T, capital A, which means target audience. You know, it's like the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer, my friend, is in all these alphabet soup acronyms. It's there in spades. I mean, all of the programs that we're experiencing are laid out by the military, by the think tanks, et cetera. The TA is a target audience. Of course, that includes the TIs, the targeted individuals. A 4GW, fourth generation warfare, is more or less synonymous with, now you've got other position papers and terms, unconventional warfare, UW, and many articles about that in the military literature. Irregular warfare, capital I, capital R. Asymmetrical warfare, capital A, capital W. Low intensity conflict, capital LIC. Military operations other than war, capital MOOTW. and network-centric warfare, capital NCW. This new war involves international interagency cooperation between the military, federal, and local law enforcement, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, intergovernmental organizations, IGOs, the civilian population, including private voluntary organizations, PVOs, and private government contractors. And of course, InfraGard of the FBI, et cetera. There's many, many of these. This multinational force, MNF, involves NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the UN, of course, the United Nations, and is termed Civilian Military Operations, CMO. Now, I have to interject here that Doug Valentine in the CIA as organized crime mentions that since 9/11, and I haven't checked his numbers, but he says since 9/11, $8 trillion of taxpayer money has been taken out of social programs and put into the new national security establishment, which is kind of organized by Department of Homeland Security, as we'll get into. Okay, so then go on with this 4GW. In its Unconventional Warfare Manual, the U.S. Army states that these new enemies will be hunted down, isolated, denied critical services, and attacked. Okay, there it is, Catherine. Dr. Catherine Horton, who's being attacked in England, and a host of other TIs around the world. I mean, this is in the literature, in U.S. Army documents. This will happen all over the planet, in your cities and your towns, anywhere that pockets of resistance remain. By the way, your cities and your towns, the internet, any channel of communication has now been redefined by the military as the battle space. We're living in the battle space, Paul. You're living in the battle space. The kind of interview we're doing now is the battle space. The internet, email communication is the battle space. So everything is a war for these guys. And they have a lot of money and a lot of smart people. So we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
Okay, in his Non-Lethal Weapons to Gain Relevancy in Future Conflicts article, 2002 issue of National Defense, John B. Alexander, who's one of the big advocates for non-lethal weapons, said that terrorists who live amongst the civilian population in densely populated cities around the world will be identified and attacked with non-lethal weapons. He says, tactically, the United States must find, fix, isolate, and destroy terrorist cells and hostile command and control networks as quickly as they are identified. The only solution is to eradicate the entire organism. You start reading this stuff, and it's just, it just goes on and on. 1995 report, non-lethal technologies, military options and implications. The Council on Foreign Relations, they're a little bit above the CIA, as we saw in the interview with Alan Dulles. He always worked. In fact, he was one of the founders of the CFR in his early career, and then he presided over the Kennedy assassination half a century later. But he always worked for the CFR, even as director of as the CIA. The CFR suggested that in a covert war against a global enemy, secrecy must be used to preserve the effectiveness of these new weapons and to create confusion as to the source of the attacks. You have to start to get into this mindset. I mean, these guys are killers. The number one goal is to kill. And now we have lots of clever ways to do it, see? And this is really fun. It's like playing a video game, you know? So you can just imagine the Department of Homeland Security with 250,000 employees, and a budget of $40 billion a year. And they're people, it's like they're playing video games. Let's kill that guy, let's kill that guy, you know? And well, Pac-Man or whatever, you know, they do, you know? In his 1970 book, Between Two Ages, the United States in the Technotronic Era, Trilateral Commissioner co-founders, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's been a very prominent advisor to Obama, notes that new technologies, including directed energy weapons, will be available to leaders of the developed nations to conduct secret warfare, of which only a small number of security forces would be needed. Well, we can go on through the definitions. I mean, these are defined in military documents. Asymmetrical warfare, interagency, international operation, which takes place among the civilian population. U.S. Army refers to this as population-centric war. Civilians are now used as surrogate forces. And this, of course, is a big part of the gang stalking, all this street theater and but not vigilante neighborhood watch. This is what's going on. People, citizen informers, are paid either full-time or part-time, or they're volunteers working with these government programs, but they're not allowed to divulge that. So now you've militarized the entire society through these networks, and this is all part of the system. Then we get into, let's see, definition of insurgents, which would be me.
Yeah, me too.
Under this, the DoD's Dictionary of Military and Associated Terms defines an insurgent as a member of a political party who rebels against established leadership. Well, by writing that paper saying that 911 was an inside job, which any idiot can see that it was,
Yeah, you did it.
you have to be you have to have developed a double think as an Orwell. You have to have learned, 2 and 2 equals 5, to not see that 911 was an inside job.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how obvious it is. By saying that, of course, then I become an insurgent. And of course, then that allows them to be the counterinsurgents and to come down and squash me and others with, gang stalking and directed energy weapons. These insurgents are those who try to persuade the population to accept political change. Those who resist tyranny nonviolently may be considered insurgents. RAND, the think tank for the Pentagon, states that the new enemies are those using, quote, information attacks to strike against the large corporate or trade or political institutions. And most of these, they say, are non-state actors. The CFR document states, in transformation of a process, there are often elements less subject to evolution. See, now apparently I'm not evolved enough, I'm not evolved enough to want global government or something. They suggest that the U.S. military change its tactics to neutralize these people who are not evolved enough. Hey, the military says, yeah, great, give us some money, we'll do it. It's what we're good at, man.
Yeah. And the ones that
That's what we do.
And the ones that we're finding are gang stalking are way above the average intelligence. They're bright people who are able to see through stuff. They're in touch with, their own right brain also. So they're not only bright, but they're also aware. That threatens their game.
Well, it is an information war. It's our information and versus their information to establish the legitimacy of the state and the military. Now, the military is concerned about this legitimacy thing, and they've got documents saying that, like we have to be perceived as legitimate. Yeah. So one of the tactics that we can and must use, of course, is to point out that the government are the terrorists.
Yes.
And not us. Now, let me give you an example of that. Here is a statement by the Department of Defense. Documenting that fact. Terrorism will be used by the MNF, multinational force, if necessary. Terrorism is an act of violence against a civilian population to achieve a political objective. This means a HN, host nation government, including the U.S., will carry out large-scale acts of violence against its own population to achieve political objectives. There it is in the military documents. We are going to carry out terrorist acts for political purposes.
Yes.
And of course they have. This is what they do now. Each of these shooters, these Aurora and the thing in Florida and the Boston Marathon bombing. I mean, this is all CIA stuff. These guys are manipulating others through mind control and through also I think through the gang stalking. Directed energy weapons to actually do the killing. I mean, if you've got a fragmented human being who's now a weapons platform that can be triggered from one personality to another, to commit a crime, the Manchurian Candidate, which of course the CIA perfected that back in the early 60s. Right. Then these people make the perfect criminals, because they're actually kind of robots at this point. They're automatons. Exactly. So the CIA has these technologies. Perhaps you're familiar with the case of the guy who went kind of ballistic in the naval yard and took out his gun and started shooting people. And on the barrel, the rifle, he had scratched in the barrel, "This is my ELF weapon." Well, ELF stands for extremely low frequency. Yeah. So he himself was a target of these directed energy weapons. And he went over the edge, as anybody would, as anybody will. Sure. Because this technology can kill you, it can make you crazy, the voice of God can, just drive you nuts. And it meant to do so. So there it is, the confession in the military documents that they are the terrorists. Also I have 5 recent posts on my website, which is gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com, and also these same posts on my 911nwo.com website. The gang stalking website kind of morphs out of the 911 website, that define these terms, that give the laws leading up to this present situation, that compare the modern gang stalking operation with the Phoenix program, and that give translate or transcribes Marshall Thomas's 15-minute video, and you can look at the video there too, and then also put some of his main conclusions from his book there. And then one more, these 5 new posts on my websites talk about the similarities between the gang stalking program and the Phoenix program. And it's very interesting that I think a lot of psychological warfare has gone into even the terms. Gang stalking gives you the impression of, gangs in LA going after you. Of course, it's not that. It's the whole system. Right. It's the whole government, military, intelligence, local authorities, and civilian vigilantes against you, with all the high tech that the military has been developing, often in secret for the last, half a century. So our terms for stalking are a little bit limited. The typical synonyms are organized stalking, cause stalking, community stalking, vigilante stalking, multi-stalking, gaslighting. You'll find those on the computer. All of those don't mention the PsyOps that's gone into this, or the directed energy weapons that are going into this, or called the non-lethal weapons. So these are very limiting terms. And we need to break out of kind of this conceptual straitjacket. I think maybe a better term would be organized stalking electronic warfare, or PsyOps electronic warfare, or the U.S. military's unconventional war against domestic targets, or a modern global interagency Phoenix program, if we can get that concept resurrected. Here are some synonyms that Valentine uses for the Phoenix program. And again, he wrote a book about it. And he's using descriptors and terms that were used back in the day, back in the late 60s when the program was at its height. By the way, in an 8 to 14-month period, 24,000 some civilians were killed in the Phoenix program between 1967 and 68 or something like that.
About the Phoenix program, what I'd like to know, give us a little refresher on the Phoenix program, Professor.
Sure. Well, okay, I will do that. And well, let me just continue, Paul, if I could, the synonyms that have been used for this Phoenix program, because I think they are applicable to our gang stalking. Right. Sergeant Ed Murphy, who was actually running it, the guy's name was Brickham, who actually invented it, and then a guy named Robert Comer was the point man in D.C. that worked with Lyndon Johnson on this, and it got a lot of support. The interesting thing about the Phoenix program, is that it's considered the major success of the Vietnam War by our leaders. Here now is a way we can neutralize the domestic population. So this became the prototype then for what was happening in Central America, all the death squads in the 1980s. It became the prototype for the death squads in Afghanistan and Iraq in the early 21st century. And it is now the prototype for our gang stalking. So this is why it's important now to look at some of the synonyms that have been used for the Phoenix program. One by Ed Murphy, a bounty hunting program. You put a bounty on somebody's head, you go get them. Another one, political warfare. Another one, psychological warfare. Another one, deniable population control. Death squad operations. Hunter-killer teams. Political mass murder. Political neutralization warfare. A highly bureaucratic system to dispense anyone or thing that cannot be ideologically assimilated. Isn't that nice? Ideologically assimilated. I love that.
You have to be an idiot. You have to be an idiot.
Yeah, no, in other words, a fool, a double-minded fool who you know, thinks 2 and 2 is 6. You know, death lists. These
synonyms are the best definition for the Phoenix program you could have presented.
Yeah, well, we're still working on it.
Okay,
still working on it. Death lists, targeting the civilian infrastructure of the Viet Cong, of course. Quote, the greatest blackmail scheme ever invented, because you don't want to get on that list.
That's right.
Program to terrify the civilian population into submission, a protection racket, an extrajudicial system, a mechanism to extend the war indefinitely. Because now you're always attacking the civilians and you always have a war. This counterinsurgency war is always going on. Unstated policy, murdering civilians.
Yeah.
The next one, intentional corruption of collaborating officials, including drug trafficking. We're seeing that happening all over the United States and the world now. This is a prototype of operation. We need to read Doug Valentine's book to understand it. A quote-unquote pacification program, a quota system for neutralizations. Again, they had a quota system in the Phoenix program of 1,800 neutralizations per month. And guys like John Kerry and Bob Kerry, the officers had to go out and, you know, kill that many to get, you know, to get their demerit, get their merits, I guess, their merit pay or whatever the equivalent was. And then again, in July 15, 1971, it was reported that 26,843 Vietnamese citizens, non-military, were neutralized in the previous 14 months. So I got my years off a little bit. And the National Interrogation Centers, NIC, and the Provincial Interrogation Centers, the PICs, were actually torture centers. And they were part of a network of the Phoenix program that coordinated the interagency operations, much like the fusion centers and the terrorism task force of the FBI. Okay, so those are the synonyms. Let me tell you a little bit about the Phoenix program here, because I did write that out. The description from Valentine here. You know, we're still just kind of scratching the surface, right? Because again, so much money and time and you know has been put into this. I do want to get into the psychological operations, but let's go to the Phoenix program. Let's see here. There it is. Okay, Phoenix program created by the CIA in Saigon, Vietnam in 1967 to neutralize the leaders and supporters of the communist-led insurgency in South Vietnam, referred to by the CIA as the Viet Cong Infrastructure, or VCI. These VCI infrastructure civilians were patriots resisting foreign aggression, but they were considered as spies and terrorists. American officials wrote laws that allowed the U.S. military to detain, torture, and kill them by every means possible, including B-52 raids, battalion-size cordon and search operations, and death squads. The Phoenix program evolved from a rifle-shot approach to neutralize enemy leaders into a program of systematic repression for the political control of the South Vietnamese people. It sought to accomplish this through a highly bureaucratized system of disposing of people who could not be ideologically assimilated. The CIA found a legal basis for the program in emergency decrees and administrative detention laws that enabled American advisors to detain, torture, and kill national security offenders without due process. Within this extra-legal judicial system with its Stalinist security communities, the VCI was anybody who didn't support the puppet government. To be neutral or to advocate for peace was viewed as supporting terrorism. Yeah. Proof wasn't required, just the word of an anonymous informer. The psychological warfare aspect of the Phoenix program was so pervasive that people had to watch every word they said. Modeled by its creator, Nelson Brickham, on Ford Motor Company's command post structure. The CIA used a quota system, as we talked about. The Phoenix fulfilled its destiny, this is again Valentine's words, in the wake of 9/11 and became the template for policing the empire and fighting its eternal war on terror. So successful were Phoenix operations in overthrowing the Ba'athist Party regime in Iraq, that was Saddam Hussein's party, that David Kilcullen, one of the US government's top terrorism advisors to Obama and Bush and to Petraeus, General Petraeus, said in 2004, he called in an article for a global Phoenix program. Guess where we are? We've got a global Phoenix program. It's called gang stalking, for lack of a better term. This process began immediately after 9/11 with the repressive Patriot Act and a series of presidential executive orders that have since legalized the administrative detention and murder of American citizens said to be involved in terrorism. In 2010, the Washington Post reported the Military Joint Special Operations Command maintains a target list that includes several Americans. In 2013, Attorney General Eric Holder announced that President Obama, quote, has authority to use drone strikes to kill Americans on U.S. soil. So the bureaucratic groundwork is being laid as well, just as the Phoenix program had its, quote, intelligence, operations, and coordination centers where interagency efforts were coordinated and quotas were met and, targets were met in terms of, quotas of whatever, 1,200 a month. These were established in every province and district in South Vietnam. The Department of Homeland Security, which came out of the 2002 Homeland Security Act, has now established fusion centers in every state and major city. And the FBI has established joint terrorism task forces to coordinate representatives from every police, security, military, and civic organization in every state and major city. So what we're talking about is humongous. It's enormous. Again, we're still learning about it, but getting better insights.
Right.
Yeah, again, on the bestiary of military terms, this is a post that I've just made on my two websites related to this, and I think bestiary is kind of an interesting way to start it, because I think we are talking about the beast here. Yeah. But if you go through this bestiary of terms, anybody can go through that, and I'm still working on it to flesh it out. They can understand, because these are coming out of military publications and CFR publications, et cetera. We can understand what we're up against. Now, okay, let me go through a term here. We talked about fourth generation warfare, yes, which is 4GW. Well, one of the most effective mobile tactical units that they have to conduct this is called C4ISR. Now, C2W is command and control warfare. Any warfare has to have command and control, and communication. Yes. Yes. So then they added communications center to make it C3. Well, then you add computers and you get C4, command, control, communications, computer center, that utilizes intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Now, let me just go through the definition of what these C4ISR centers are, because there could be one in your neighborhood. It says multiple interacting components of C4ISRs include battle space, again, the world is the battle space now, monitoring, battle space monitoring, awareness, understanding, sense-making, command intent, battle space management, synchronization, and information systems. C4ISR centers can be mobile or stationary or virtual, that is to say, strictly based on computer interactions.
Right.
Each military service has its own tactical mobile C4ISR system. The Navy and Marines use the ForceNet. The Air Force uses Command Control Constellation, C2 Constellation. The Army uses Land War Net and Win/T. Each type of the C4ISR system is connected to the global information grid. The C4 system instructs human nodes that are interacting with the TI, that's the target individual, in real time. So let's say you're a civilian who's been hired full time, and there's a guy called Street Preacher who's got a little YouTube where he kind of accosts this big fat guy in a grocery store and says, "Hey, why are you gang stalking?" You know, he says, "Well," and the guy just, you know, once in a while people are going to be honest, and he just says, "Well, I'm paid." And he said, "Well, what are you paid?" He says, "Well, I'm a GS-12." Well, if you know anything about, you know, GS, the government pay scale, GS means government service, and 12 pretty high. Yeah. So here's a guy who's making a lot of money spying on his and surveilling and harassing his fellow human beings. And then Karen Stewart, the ex-NSA whistleblower, who's now a TI, would get into the habit when one of these skits was going on and people were harassing her in the street. She'd just say, you know, "Why are you doing this? How much are you being paid?" And once in a while, somebody will answer and say, well, one guy said, "I get $100 if I look at my iPhone and I go through a list of photographs and I see, you know, I'm able to connect the photograph in my, you know, application, my app for my iPhone with you, and then I report in the time and the location of you to the, you know, one of these mobile centers, and then they log in $100 from my account." So this would be somebody who's kind of gaming the system part-time. Right. So if you're driving down to work, for instance, and you see people parked along the road, you know, looking at their iPhones, well, that's what they might be doing, you know. Right. They're making money spying on you. And, of course, others are making money doing these gaslighting, you know, operations, harassing you, and street theater, et cetera. So what we have now then is what they call CMO, Civilian Military Operations, which combine military, federal agencies, NGOs, civilian organizations and authorities, and the civilian population. And the Boston Globe in 2003 said that the DHS was hoping to recruit 100 million civilians to be part of their surveillance spy operation. Okay, that's almost 1 out of 3 Americans. Now, the Stasi got the record back in bad old days for 1 out of 6.5 civilian spies in East Germany, communist East Germany. And again, you can read about that. There's a book called Stasiland, which tells stories about that. And there's a movie called The Lives of Others. And of course, when East Germany fell, the Iron Curtain came down in 1989, the records that the government had accumulated on all of its citizens were opened up. And this is pre-computer, so people were able to go in and look at their files and see what the government had written in their files about them. And of course, this is what the NSA is doing with all Americans and probably everybody in the world now in their huge Utah data processing center. And this would be then fed to the fusion centers and et cetera. So you have to get an idea of the magnitude of the shared information here. CMOs, civilian military operations, are used in friendly, neutral, and hostile operational areas. They would get into military speak, including populated civilian areas in which no other military activity is conducted. It is used to deal with domestic threats in the new war. That would be the insurgents like me. The controlling faction of these PsyOps, CMO activities includes the military, again, blah, 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 In the U.S., the controlling faction is FEMA, Federal Emergency
Yes.
Management Agency, which originally under Oliver North was the Federal Emergency Military Authority, and he's the guy who put together Operation Rex, and Operation Rex got our many detention centers. What do you call those things? There's supposed to be all these detention centers all over America now, where they can FEMA camps, yeah, where they can take insurgents like me and go lock them up and torture us or whatever,
Right.
you know, they want to do, kill us. So FEMA is in a controlling position, the Department of Justice, the CIA, and other agencies, including the FBI, the DHS, and the NSA. Again, civilians are used as irregular forces. I wanted to mention just a little bit about PsyOps, because this is so fascinating. You might have some insights. Psychological operations are a major part of the new war and a core part of CMO, civilian military operations, combined with capital EW, electronic warfare, and capital CNO. Boy, I'm tell you what is that? Computer network operations. PO, psychological operations, involves synergistic coordination of PsyOp. Now we get into more of these, acronyms. MILDEC, which is MILDEC, acronym for military deception. OPSEC, which is operation security, and EBO, capital EBO, effects-based operations. PsyOp units work within the civilian population as irregular forces to attack target audience, which includes targeted individuals, in the area of operation, AO, which is the battle space. And PsyOp operators first profile the TAs and the TIs to devise themes to attack their TAs, target audience. The ultimate goal of the PsyOp is to modify the behavior of the TIA by destroying their will, using a relentless attack consisting of painful triggers. So these themes are developed to send messages, and eventually they want to get an anchor, which is a trigger which gives you a certain emotion, and then they use that, they'll trigger that anchor over and over again with whatever visual or audio or stimulus. So it's basically stimulus response program, which is very sophisticated, again, to destroy the will. This is in their documents of the target audience or individual. Then a type of audiovisual product known as a PsyAct includes agents of action. These would be the surveillance role players. These would be the citizen spies. Often the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, will actually go to actors guilds and find unemployed actors and put them to work doing these PsyActs.
Yeah.
So now that I think about it, Paul, now that we've lost in America our manufacturing base and our industrial base, now it seems that the whole economy is based on this national security establishment. So we can make a living by screwing our fellow Americans.
Right.
What a great system, huh?
Yeah.
And so eventually what they want to do, they use these PsyActs, these agents of actions conduct these PsyActs who carry out plays, this is the street theater, in the presence of the TIA, and every single channel of communication that the TIA uses for information is interfered with. So if you're on the internet, they're going to work around with that. If you're on the phone, they're going to, they mess with that. Yeah. And they can spoof these things. They talk about spoofing, your emails, and they'll jump in and pretend to be your friend and give you a weird message, or whatever. I mean, this certainly happened to me. You don't know who's on the other end. So PsyOps are very integral part of this. This is be another word for what we call the gang stalking.